Have you ever watched a land bleed without war, not from bullets, but from drought, from silence, from forgotten promises? A place where children dig the earth, not to sow seeds, but to scoop water with their bare hands. Where mothers boil leaves instead of rice, and grandfathers whisper prayers into empty bowls. They say Africa is poor, but who took the gold, who priced our soil, then made us beg for food grown on it? In Burkina Faso, a country they dismissed as dry and desperate, something unthinkable happened. No loans, no foreign engineers, just hands, calloused, determined. They built a canal nearly 100 kilometers long with nothing but sweat and belief. A soldier signed no debt agreements. He picked up a shovel, and he dug alongside mothers, students, old farmers. This is not a story of charity. It is a story of defiance. It is a question etched into the sand. What if Africa no longer asks for permission to live? If this story stirs something in you, subscribe. Not just for the video, but for a dream of a new Africa. In the early 1980s, Burkina Faso became a classroom for foreign experiments. Every drought summoned a convoy of experts. Every famine was followed by an IMF press release. Every economic slump birthed a new rescue package, with elegant signatures but invisible strings. They called it assistance, but each coin came with a condition. Cut your public spending. Privatize your water. Open your markets to our grains, even if your own crops rot in silence. And so it began. Farmers who once walked proudly into their fields were told they needed approval to plant their own seeds. Rice, millet, groundnuts, abandoned. Why? Because cheaper wheat from Europe now filled the warehouses. A mother in Zabre once asked, "How can I feed my children if our land is no longer ours to decide over?" In the capital, reports were written in French and English. They spoke of inclusive growth and millennium goals. But in the villages, children still walked 5 kilometers to drink from a muddy stream. Aid arrived, but it was labeled. Each water pump bore the flag of a donor. Each school building had a metal plaque supported by USAID, a gift from the European Union. Behind each plaque, a contract. Behind each contract, a decision made somewhere else. Young graduates were told, "Your plans must pass Geneva's desk before your village can begin." And so the nation waited, for approvals, for signatures, for guidelines. In that waiting, something deeper was lost. The belief that Africans could design their own destiny. It was a quiet theft, not of gold or diamonds, but of dignity. This is what they do not tell you about development. That sometimes it sounds like generosity, but it feels like a leash. And over time that leash becomes normal, until one girl, one young student named Amina, asks her teacher, "Why do we write about water when our wells are dry?" And her answer, "Because we forgot how to ask better questions." It did not begin with protests, it began with memory. In a northern village, a group of women sat in a circle, refusing to cook with imported grains. They laid out local rice, old recipes, whispered by grandmothers, and said, "This is ours. We will not forget how to feed ourselves." In Ouagadougou, students painted banners by hand. They hung them at the gates of their universities. No slogans, just truths. We do not need imported development. Let us try and fail and try again, but on our terms. Young engineers met in abandoned classrooms. They brought maps, old farming tools, stories from their grandparents. They did not want jobs abroad. They wanted to rebuild the land they were told was no longer worth saving. These were not political parties. They had no funding, no offices, no logos. But they had each other. They had memory. Some called it rebellion, others called it madness. But in their silence, a question began to rise. What if we are not weak? What if we are just unheard? Across dry fields, retired farmers began teaching again. Not in schools, but in the soil. They showed how to test the wind, how to store water in clay jars, how to read the earth like scripture. Mothers began planting small herb gardens by their huts, not for profit, but to say, "We remember who we were." On local radio, the tone shifted. Instead of news from Brussels, they played poetry. Written by canal diggers, recited by barefoot boys who sang, "The land slept, but we did not. The shovel is our voice. We build because we are tired of waiting." This was not rage, this was a quiet fire, and it spread. Not with slogans but with hands, not with weapons but with will. And so today we ask you, if you were Amina walking 4 kilometers every day to a dry well, would you wait for aid or would you dig with your own hands until water came? Type your answer in the comments. Because your voice matters. It always has. It was not a press conference, it was not a budget meeting, it was a single sheet of paper. In April 2024, Captain Ibrahim Traoré signed a decree. No cameras, no applause, just one sentence. The canal shall be dug by us for us. For years that plan had gathered dust in foreign offices. Too risky, they said. Too expensive. Too ambitious for a poor desert nation. But for Traoré the question was never whether the world approved. It was whether his people were ready to believe again. And so the digging began. There were no foreign engineers flown in from Geneva. No reports stamped by the African Development Bank. No feasibility studies, just hands. Calloused, sunburnt, unpaid. Single mothers lifted shovels. Retired teachers measured soil depth. Hydraulic students mapped the terrain. Veterans guided the flow. Old men sang while they worked. Young boys carried water to cool the dust. There were no hard hats, just headscarves and sandals. Every 10 meters dug was a declaration we do not need permission to build. Every bucket of earth removed was a rebellion. Debt is not our destiny. In 127 days, the impossible became visible. Water, first a trickle, then a stream, moved through cracked soil like a silver prayer. Some wept. Others dropped to their knees, not in disbelief, but in gratitude. They had seen too many maps that excluded them. Now they saw a line carved by their own hands. Markets reopened. Vendors whispered, "If we have canals, we can replant." Children touched the water and smiled as if touching their own future. And Traoré, he stood in the dirt barefoot holding a hoe. He did not give speeches, he gave sweat. And when asked why, he said, "We are not poor, we are buried, so we dig." This was not just irrigation, it was resurrection. The silence was louder than any applause. When the first water flowed through the Kugri Canal, there were no headlines in Western newspapers, no technical papers, no think tank panels. They who once analyzed every breath from Burkina Faso suddenly had nothing to say. But silence too is a statement. Then the whispers began. Articles questioned where the money came from. Was gold diverted? Was this infrastructure? Or insubordination? Aid agencies that once called the project unfeasible now warned of environmental risks. A new academic phrase crept into journals' authoritarian localism. And then came the punishments. No sanctions, just delays, cancellations, discreet calls behind closed doors, a European education grant, frozen, a German energy delegation postponed, an IMF debt restructuring deal worth $120 million suspended. No press releases, just quiet consequences. One diplomat said off record, "If Burkina can do it, so can Mali, so can Niger. We cannot allow that precedent." But Traoré did not retreat. He did not plead. He pivoted. In July 2024, delegations from Mali, Niger, and Guinea met with Burkina Faso in the heart of Ouagadougou. No suits from Washington, no consultants from Brussels. Engineers, farmers, ministers, they came not to negotiate terms but to dream, together. The result? A pact, a regional irrigation network, funded not by foreign banks but pooled resources from Sahelian nations. And with it a new phrase was born: regional self-reliance. They launched the African Agricultural Development Fund, led by local engineers, focused on ancestral techniques, not carbon credits, not dependency. At the summit, Traoré spoke only once. No charts, no graphs. He said, "We used to live on borrowed money, but we cannot teach our children that begging is a sustainable way of life. We must build canals. But more than that, we must build courage." Across the continent, the shift was felt. New radio stations emerged run by citizens. Social media lit up with names like "Africa digs canals, not debts." And from the fields of Mali to the coasts of Guinea, a single message echoed: "We are not waiting anymore." This story began with a trench in the earth, but it ends with something far deeper, a trench in history. For decades they told us that dignity comes with conditions, that loans were lifelines, that development needed approval. But now, in the quiet countryside of Burkina Faso, a new truth flows. Not in speeches, in water. The Kugri Canal is not just a structure, it is a mirror. And in it, a people see themselves, standing tall, not kneeling, owning, not asking, building, not borrowing. Across the fields, crops sway again. Farmers walk like owners, not tenants. Children write essays titled, "If I were an engineer, I would dig freedom into the land." This transformation cannot be captured in a chart. It is measured in the pride of a mother who knows her child will eat, in the voice of a teacher who no longer has to teach hunger with history. And yet this quiet revolution makes the world uneasy. Because if the poorest can succeed without debt, then every development model must be questioned. That is why the resistance now comes not with tanks, but with doubt. Not with bombs, but with whispers. But the people know. They have touched the water. They have held the tools. And they will not be silenced. So now it is your turn. If you are a leader, will you keep signing plans drawn in Paris? Or will you stand barefoot beside your people and dig a future worth inheriting? If you are a father, a student, a believer, ask yourself, what will you leave behind? A loan agreement or a lifeline? This is not just about Burkina Faso. This is about all of us. This is Africa rising, Africa reborn, not with flags and fireworks, but with calloused hands and a dream no longer deferred. As a viewer, I did not expect to cry over a canal, but I did. This was not just a video. It was a mirror, and in it I saw the truth many try to forget. The truth that somewhere far from the skyscrapers and summit meetings, a people stood up, not with slogans, not with weapons, but with shovels. I watched a desert nation dig life out of death. Burkina Faso often ignored, often mocked, refused to wait. They did not ask for permission. They did not wait for consultants. They simply believed. And that belief moved more than just earth. It moved me. What touched me most was not the engineering feat, though that alone was miraculous. It was the dignity, the quiet, fierce dignity in the hands of mothers, in the songs of old men, in the maps drawn by students in dusty classrooms. No one told them they could do it. In fact, the world told them the opposite. Too poor, too dry, too ambitious. But Traoré didn't listen to the noise. He listened to the silence of empty wells, of forgotten fields, of children writing essays about water they couldn't drink. And then he broke that silence with action. As I sat on my couch with clean water just a faucet away, I felt a wave of shame and admiration. Shame because I've lived in comfort while others have had to fight just to live. Admiration because despite every obstacle, these people rose. They didn't build a canal, they built hope. And hope once awakened cannot be silenced. Watching the elderly farmer dig alongside a teenage student reminded me this is what unity looks like. No uniforms, no press conferences, just hands, just heart, just home. One quote echoed in my head long after the video ended, "We are not poor, we are buried, so we dig." That line hit me like a thunderbolt, because it's not just about Burkina Faso, it's about all of us. How many of us live buried by fear, by systems, by doubt? How many of us are waiting for someone else to rescue us, to fix what's broken, to bring water to our wells? Burkina Faso didn't wait. They remembered who they were before the debts, before the conditions, before the dependency. And in remembering, they reclaimed power. I was particularly struck by the silence of the Western media. Not because I didn't expect it, but because it confirmed what many already suspect, that some victories are inconvenient. That real independence threatens the status quo. That dignity, when exercised by the powerless, becomes a danger to those who benefit from their weakness. But Burkina Faso didn't seek validation, they sought water, and they found it. As a viewer, I feel changed, I feel challenged. Because this wasn't a documentary, it was a call to conscience. When I saw Traoré standing barefoot in the dirt, hoe in hand, I saw something the world desperately lacks: a leader who sweats before he speaks. Not a president in a suit behind bulletproof glass, but a man beside his people covered in dust, holding not a microphone but a shovel. That image stays with me. And I asked myself, what if every nation had such leadership? What if development didn't come in loans but in labor? What if the measure of progress was not GDP but grit? This story redefines what power looks like. Power is not writing policies from Paris. It's planting herbs beside your home and saying, this is ours. We will feed ourselves. Power is refusing to cook imported rice when your land can grow better. Power is a mother teaching her child that dignity does not come in a labeled box from abroad. It comes in sweat, in community, and belief. And belief is contagious. As I read the comments under the video voices from Mali, from Niger, from the diaspora, I saw something beautiful: unity. A recognition that what happened in Burkina Faso was not isolated. It was the spark of something greater. This is not just a canal. It is a wound healed. It is a history rewritten. It is a continent remembered. And now the question is no longer whether they can do it, but whether we will join them. Whether we will continue living as spectators, or step into the dirt and dig not just for water, but for meaning. Burkina Faso dug a canal, but what they really did was dig us out of our comfort, out of our cynicism, out of our excuses. They reminded us that the human spirit, when undiluted by dependence, is capable of miracles. To the people of Burkina Faso, to Captain Traoré, and to every hand that touched that soil, thank you. You have not only carved a path for water, you have carved a path for all of us. From now on, I will not see dry land the same way. I will see possibility. I will see resistance. I will see home. And most of all, I will never again believe the lie that Africa must wait. Because Africa is not waiting. Africa is building. Africa is rising. And the world must now choose to support or to step aside. Watching the story of the Kugri Canal was not just informative, it was transformative. It was not just about water. It was about something much deeper: dignity, sovereignty, memory, and what it means for a people to rise without waiting for permission. As a viewer, I came expecting a documentary. What I received was a wake-up call, a story carved not only into the land of Burkina Faso, but into my conscience. I was born and raised in a part of the world where water comes from taps, where development is a word used in reports, where foreign aid is something we give, not something we question. I was taught that progress flows from capital, from experts, from charts and graphs, from Washington, London, Geneva. But what I saw in this story challenged all of that. Here was a country often ridiculed, overlooked, and dismissed as one of the poorest on earth, doing something none of the experts thought was possible. They dug a 100-kilometer canal, by hand, without a single coin from the IMF, without the presence of Western consultants, without permission. They didn't hold a press conference. They didn't announce it at a development summit. They simply picked up shovels and began. And with each shovel of earth, a myth was buried. The myth that Africa is incapable without foreign help. The myth that dignity is something granted by others. The myth that poor nations must wait in line for approval to dream. What moved me most was not the scale of the canal, it was the scale of the courage. Mothers, students, soldiers, and retired teachers all came together for something that went beyond infrastructure. This was not a project, this was a declaration, a prayer, a resurrection. I was deeply touched by the image of Captain Ibrahim Traoré standing barefoot in the dirt, not with bodyguards or suits, but with a hoe. In a world where politicians hide behind podiums and security fences, here was a leader who did not just lead by words, he led by labor. That image will stay with me forever. And then the silence. Not from the people of Burkina Faso, but from the rest of the world. Western media, which usually analyzes every breath from African nations, suddenly had nothing to say. No praise, no support, just silence. But silence is also a message. And in that silence I heard something loud and clear. This kind of success is inconvenient. Because if Burkina Faso can rise without loans, then the entire aid industry must ask itself, what exactly are we doing? And that perhaps is the greatest lesson of all. Burkina Faso didn't just build a canal, they tore down a narrative. They proved that the so-called third world is not waiting to be saved, it is waiting to remember. That word memory appeared again and again in the story. Women refusing to cook imported rice, elders teaching ancient farming techniques, students gathering in abandoned classrooms to plan to rebuild, to dream. This wasn't a rebellion, this was a revival of the belief that Africa's past holds the wisdom to shape its future. That development must not be imported, it must be rooted. What struck me was how deeply spiritual this movement felt. There was poetry in the soil, there was prayer in the labor, there was music in the sound of hands digging earth that had been labeled worthless by outsiders. And then came the quiet punishments. Frozen grants, canceled meetings, suspended deals. No official statement, just consequences. Because in the eyes of those who profit from dependency, self-reliance is not just radical, it's dangerous. Yet Burkina Faso did not fold. Instead, they invited Mali, Niger, and Guinea to join them. They created a regional pact, not with donors but with neighbors, not with contracts drafted in Paris but with trust forged in Ouagadougou. And out of that pact came a new phrase, one that should be written in every classroom, every ministry, every village across the continent: regional self-reliance. As a viewer, I felt humbled, because this story reminded me that the world we live in is not divided by wealth but by will, and no amount of GDP can replace the power of collective purpose. Burkina Faso reminded us that we are not defined by what we lack, but by what we refuse to surrender. And the people of Burkina Faso have refused to surrender their future. They have reclaimed their right to decide, to build, to feed themselves, to educate their children without waiting for some foreign agency's approval. That is more than a success story, that is a revolution. It makes me wonder what we, in the developed world, have lost: our connection to the land, to one another, to meaning. We have infrastructure, but do we have community? We have abundance, but do we have purpose? Watching barefoot children touch the flowing water as if touching their own future brought tears to my eyes. Not because I pitied them, but because I envied them. In that moment they were more free than many of us who live in comfort but carry invisible chains. And so I return to that powerful question posed at the end of the video. If you are a leader, will you keep signing plans drawn in Paris, or will you dig beside your people? I am not a leader, but I am a witness. And as a witness, I choose to share this story, because the world must know that Africa is not a project. Africa is not a problem. Africa is a power, and it is rising. Not with banners or bombs, but with calloused hands, with shovels, with songs sung in dusty fields by grandfathers and grandsons. This story has changed me. It has made me question what kind of world we are building and who we are building it for. I hope more people see this. I hope more people feel what I felt. And above all, I hope more people start to dig. Because sometimes to change the world, you don't need $1 billion. You just need a shovel. And a reason. After the video ended, I sat still for a long time. Not because I was unsure of what to think, but because I was overwhelmed by how much I had never thought about. We live in a world where we scroll past stories of war, famine, poverty, and climate change almost numb to them. But this story, this canal, cut through the numbness. It wasn't a tragedy, it was a triumph. A quiet, dusty, beautiful triumph. I kept returning to the voices in the video. The barefoot boy reciting poetry. The students painting banners by hand. The mothers boiling local herbs beside their huts. Their defiance was soft but unshakable. Their resistance was not with fists, but with food, with seeds, with songs. And I realized something: this was not just a local event. It was global symbolism. Because if a small landlocked country like Burkina Faso can lift itself through collective memory and muscle, what excuse do the rest of us have? The West often speaks of empowering Africa. But this video showed me Africa doesn't need empowerment. It needs to be left alone to lead, to rise without conditions, to reclaim what was never truly lost, only buried. As a viewer from another continent, I feel complicit. Not because I caused the poverty, but because I accepted the narrative. I believe the statistics, the rankings, the headlines that described Africa as a place of helplessness. But now I know better. The canal is not just a miracle of engineering, it's a miracle of reframing. It forces the world to see Africa not as a recipient of solutions, but as the source of them. And this has shaken the foundations of what I used to believe about development, power, and progress. There is a line in the video that I will never forget. Development sometimes sounds like generosity, but it feels like a leash. That sentence stung. Because it's true not only in Africa, it's true in every country where policy is shaped by distant desks, where loans are signed without consent, where projects are planned without people, where help comes with rules that strangle the very growth it claims to support. Burkina Faso cut that leash, quietly, boldly, permanently, and in doing so, they've started something the world cannot ignore no matter how hard it tries. But I also noticed the fear in the international response. Not fear of violence, but fear of inspiration. One diplomat's comment still echoes in my mind. If Burkina can do it, so can Mali, so can Niger. We cannot allow that precedent. That to me was the confession of an old world order unraveling. Because once people realize they do not need to ask for permission to live with dignity, the game changes. The donor-recipient relationship collapses, and those who profited from dependency begin to panic. This is why I believe the Kugri Canal is more than a canal. It is a crack in the global system. A small glimmering fracture where sunlight finally gets in. And now the question becomes, what will we do with that light? As a viewer, I feel called not just to admire, but to act, to change how I talk about Africa, to challenge how my leaders shape foreign policy, to support platforms that amplify stories like this, not out of pity, but out of respect. Because what I saw in Burkina Faso is not weakness. It is the fiercest kind of strength, the kind that doesn't need validation, the kind that builds in silence, the kind that survives long after cameras leave. And I wonder how many such stories are hidden from us. How many villages are building sewing resisting with no headlines, no hashtags, no UN panels. The world is quick to broadcast chaos in Africa, but this story reminded me peace is being built there too. Daily, patiently, boldly, but peace doesn't make the evening news. And that's why we, the viewers, must carry these stories forward. Because silence like water flows, and sometimes it drowns the truth. That's why I'm writing this. That's why I will talk about the Kugri Canal whenever someone tells me Africa needs help. I will respond, Africa just needs space, and faith, and to be heard. Let Burkina Faso be proof. They dug not just through soil, but through cynicism, through the thick crust of doubt that the world had layered over them, and they found something richer than gold. They found themselves. Now, across villages, young girls like Amina are no longer just asking hard questions. They are planting hard answers. They are daring to dream of a future shaped by their own hands. And in a world full of noise, that quiet defiance matters more than ever. It's not just about African pride. It's about human pride. The kind that says, I do not need to be rescued. I need to be remembered. And so to every viewer like me, let us remember. Let us remember the images, the songs, the calloused hands, the barefoot boys tracing the flow of water through cracked earth. Let us remember Traoré, silent, dusty, steady, choosing to act instead of announce. Let us remember that sometimes a shovel can change a nation more than a speech. And finally, let us remember this. The canal was only the beginning. What happens next depends on us. Will we share this story? Will we challenge our systems? Will we dig not into dirt, but into the truth? Because in the mirror of the Kugri Canal, I no longer saw them. I saw us, all of us, trying, failing, rising, digging, looking for a future that does not come in aid packages but in action. And I, for one, am ready to dig. For generations, the world has told Africa that it is poor, that it must be patient, that it must wait for help. But the deeper truth buried beneath economic jargon and diplomatic smiles is that Africa has never been poor. It has been drained of its resources, its voice, its dignity. The story of Africa is not one of scarcity, but of exploitation disguised as assistance. Loans wrapped in chains, aid laced with silence. And for decades, Africa paid quietly, obediently, painfully for a system it did not design and never consented to. The World Bank and the IMF were born in the aftermath of a global war, in rooms where no African voice was present. From the very beginning, the rules of this global financial order were not written with Africa in mind, but rather written to keep Africa compliant. They came wearing suits holding promises of development. But behind those contracts were conditions. Behind those smiles were systems designed to take more than they gave. And for too long, African leaders accepted that deal. perhaps out of hope, perhaps out of necessity. But the result was always the same: debt, without dignity, survival, without sovereignty. Today, the consequences of that system are no longer hidden. Children in Burkina Faso still study under leaking roofs, while gold leaves the soil beneath their feet. Hospitals run out of gloves, while governments send millions to banks in Paris and Washington. Cobalt powers smartphones around the world, yet in Congo the health budget is smaller than the cost of a single international conference. This is not a failure of management. It is the success of a system built to exploit. It is not chaos, it is control, and yet something is changing. A soldier in dusty boots stands up and says, "We will not ask for permission to be free." His name is Ibrahim Traoré. He is not backed by banks. He is not propped up by foreign embassies. He is the son of a farmer, a captain of a new generation, a man who carries in his chest the fire of Thomas Sankara. And with that fire, he lights the path for others. He ends foreign military presence. He expels Western media. He plants 20 million trees with his people's bare hands. And he does not wait, he acts. Traoré is not a savior. He is a signal, a mirror reflecting the pain of the past and the potential of the future. He reminds us that sovereignty is not something granted. It is something claimed. That development is not something imported. It is something built from within. His rise is not the story of one man. It is the story of an entire continent remembering its worth. Africa's greatest challenge is not lack of money. It is the belief engineered, taught